Welcome to another edition of E.W. Jackson for America. Great to be with you. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. Of course, it's my first day back live this week. And of course, it's Veterans Day. And I want to say happy Veterans Day to all you veterans out there, you active duty people as well. Thank you so much for your service to our great country. One cannot say enough in gratitude to the people who put on a uniform and are prepared, prepared to go down range in order to face the dangers that we, the American people, are unable to face on our own. So thank you all very, very much for what you do to serve our country. We are deeply grateful to you. We've got a letter going out to veterans. I was just looking to see, has it gone out yet? I don't see it as yet in my box. Of course, it would come to me, and I don't see it yet. So stand by for that, because it should have hit your boxes already. But be looking for that, please, because I was going to share that with you today. You know what? I think I can find my own draft of it. Here we go. Yeah, you know what? I'll share my own draft of it. It is Veterans Day. Here's what you will receive in your emails if you haven't gotten it already. It says, on Veterans Day, we express our deepest gratitude and appreciation for the men and women who served our country in the armed forces. Their dedication, sacrifice, and bravery in defending the freedoms we hold dear cannot be overstated. The commitment they have shown in the face of hardship, the courage to stand when others falter, and the resilience to endure through unimaginable challenges are the very qualities that make this nation strong. It is because of their sacrifices that we were able to enjoy the many liberties that we take for granted. To all who have served, whether in times of peace or conflict, you have demonstrated unwavering loyalty to the ideals of our country. Your selflessness not only inspires those who follow in your footsteps, but also leaves an indelible mark on the heart of the nation. The strength of our military and the sacrifice of its members are a vital part of the fabric of America, and for that, we owe you a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. Many of those who have served have not only sacrificed years of their lives, but have lost limbs and suffered other physical and mental, emotional trauma. Their sacrifices can never be compensated. The people of America are thankful for their service, their bravery, and their sacrifice. We honor them today, but we also recognize that one day a year is not adequate to fully express what we owe them. Let us ever remember that our neighbors, friends, co-workers, and relatives who have served this nation are owed respect and honor, and may they feel the love of a grateful nation. May God bless the men and women who have sacrificed so much and who are rarely shown the respect and gratitude that they so richly deserve. So thank all of you veterans out there. We really do appreciate you. In fact, I may have read you the letter that went out last year. I'm not sure, but there'll be another one going out this year. That one is pretty poignant, and they all are. So thank you all for all that you do to make our country a place of peace and safety and security, and to convey to this very evil world that America's prepared to stand up for the ideals that we believe in, and we're prepared to stand up and fight and, if necessary, die for our freedom and for our country. So thank you, veterans, and thank you, active duty service people. I thought I would take a moment today, since it's Veterans Day, to talk a little bit about my own military experience, which I don't think I've ever really talked about with you all. I don't know why. It just has never come up. I'm very grateful to God. I say joining the Marine Corps was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I mean, it really was. Because when I went in the Marine Corps, I went in a boy and really came out a man. I went in a boy without direction and came out a man with very clear direction. Now, I wasn't saved when I came out, so I think that direction really was the direction of Almighty God, but I wasn't aware of that because, as you all know, I finished college and went through law school, and it was in the middle of law school that I ultimately got saved, which I believe was part of God's plan. But let me tell you a little bit about my own military service. I joined the Marine Corps. If I am not mistaken, I either beat the draft. When I say beat it, my numbers, because you all know we had a lottery system during the Vietnam War, and you were going to be drafted on the basis of your number. Now, you all forgive me. I'm not trying to make things up, but my recollection, frankly, is a little fuzzy about this. But as I recall, my number was not going to require me to be drafted, was not going to call upon me to be drafted. But whether it was or not, because again, I don't want to, if somebody were to check the record and say, oh, no, you were going to be drafted, I don't remember, because my decision to join the Marine Corps was independent of that. I decided that I wanted to volunteer to join the Marine Corps, so I was not drafted. However the draft would have gone, it did not go that way for me because I joined voluntarily. And, you think about it, I joined the Marine Corps voluntarily during the Vietnam War, with full understanding that what that might mean was fighting in the Vietnam War. In fact, at that time, what it would likely mean was fighting in the Vietnam War. At least that's what I thought. I didn't know that it was unlikely because I didn't know that in 1969 we were already drawing troops down. The American people weren't aware of it, but we were already drawing troops down in 1969, and that continued through 70, 71, 72. By 73, you realize all of our combat troops were out of Vietnam. We still had troops there, but they were no longer fighting. From 73 to 75, until the Vietnam War ended, we no longer had combat troops. We were no longer deploying combat troops in the field. Well, I got out in 73. So see, by the time I got out, for all practical purposes, the Vietnam War was over. I joined in 1970 thinking I was going. And I remember when I graduated from Marine Corps boot camp, coming out, and our drill instructor said, well, every single one of you is on your way to Vietnam. And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, that's what we expected. And then he kind of chuckled and said, no, actually, he said, I'm joking with you all, because they hadn't joked before, but now that we're no longer privates. We're no longer recruits. And we weren't privates, we were recruits. We're no longer recruits now. Now we're full-fledged Marines. He's treating us with a little bit more humanity. And he said, no, he said, I'm kidding. None of you has orders to Vietnam at this point. Not a single one of you has orders to Vietnam. And I said, well, that's interesting. Okay. Well, so I went from Marine Corps boot camp to, and I don't know whether they follow the same process now, but see, no matter what your MOS, in other words, no matter what your job in the Marine Corps, you're going to be combat trained. Every Marine is combat trained. So you're combat trained in hand-to-hand combat. You're combat trained in the use of firearms and weapons. And so you go from a Marine Corps boot camp, in which there's, well, we spent about I think we spent about a week on the firing range learning to shoot the I want to say the M16. It might have been the M17, but I'm pretty sure that at first it was the M16, and then later, I think in the next duty station, which was Camp Lejeune. I then went to Camp Lejeune for advanced infantry training. I think that's when we were issued the M17. I think it was M16 in boot camp, and the M17 at Camp Lejeune. So I finished up there and graduated, went on to Camp Lejeune. And I think the training at Camp Lejeune was about a month. Marine Corps boot camp training is about 9 weeks. I spent about 10 or 11 weeks. I joined the first week of August. I think I was out of there September, October. I think I was out of there toward the end of October. So I spent about a month or 6 weeks at Camp Lejeune because I came home just before Christmas. And Camp Lejeune Of course, that's where you're getting advanced infantry training. That's where, you're spending a lot more time with firearms. You're spending a lot more time in close quarter combat. You're spending a lot more time out in the field, camping and bivouacking and staying in foxholes and doing all that stuff that you might have to do in a combat situation. So that's what it's meant to prepare you for. It's a little bit different than boot camp because you're not getting the same intense dehumanizing treatment that you get in boot camp, which is to break you down and then build you back up. So I had tested very well. I don't think I've ever told you all this story. I don't think I've ever told this story publicly. So while I was in boot camp, I got off to a rocky start because I wasn't very respectful of the drill instructors, and I found the whole thing to be a joke. I was a little bit of a salty kid. And they would start screaming and hollering, and I would laugh. I'm serious. I just didn't take it that seriously. Well, they figured out a way to make me take it seriously. I got kicked out of my first platoon and sent to a place called Motivation. Now, again, I don't know whether they still have Motivation in Marine Corps boot camp now. Maybe they do. Maybe they call it by a different name. I don't know. But Motivation was a place where the hard cases were sent to get you straight. In other words, people that they thought had the potential to make it, but didn't have the right attitude. And yeah, believe it or not, I was one of those people who didn't have the right attitude. And I got to Motivation. Motivation was really, frankly, folks, it was just short of prison. It really was. It was just short of the brig because boot camp was bad enough. Motivation was even worse. How could that even be? But it was. But what made it psychologically more difficult was in boot camp, every day you were moving forward. Every day you were heading toward graduation. In Motivation, you're in a holding pattern. So every day they're wearing your backside out, working you into the ground, but you're getting nowhere. Because when you finally get dismissed from Motivation, when they say, okay, we think we got you straight now, you don't pick up a week or 5 to 4 days or 5 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is. You don't pick up where you would have been before you got dismissed from your platoon. You pick up where you were when you got dismissed from your platoon, which means now you're now behind. That platoon is going on. They've moved on. So they may be, I don't know how long I was in Motivation. I don't think it was very long, maybe 4 or 5 days. But they may be, at that point, a week ahead of you. Now you're starting with another platoon that came in after you. So this is how I ended up having a couple of different experiences. So, folks, I got motivated because when we went to mess, you couldn't eat until, let's say, your particular group might have 5 or 6 people in it. You got metal plates, you got metal platters, and you've got metal silverware, and you have to sit down without making a sound. So when everybody's back to the table, your Motivation drill instructor says, "Ready, sit." And you have to sit down without anybody making a sound. Now, if anybody makes a sound, if a chair creaks, I kid you not, folks, if a chair creaks, if a fork touches a knife and makes a clink, if the platter touches the table too hard and makes a sound, you start all over again. 10, hut, ready, sit. And you do that sometimes 4 or 5 times before you even got to sit down and eat. And then you would give them 15 minutes. I think it was 15 minutes. Might have been less, but you have a certain amount of time to eat. You don't just sit there and have a leisurely dinner. you have to scarf that food down and just and get back out on deck. And so that was life in motion. You moved dirt piles from one place to another. You moved it, 25, 50 yards from here to there. Then you moved it back. You cleaned your rifle. I think sometimes we were cleaning our rifles 2 or 3 times a day to make sure that there shouldn't be a speck of dirt, not a speck of dust, nothing on that rifle. I mean, they just put in the forced marches. Oh my goodness gracious! And I'm a walker. Y'all know my middle name is Walker, and I am a walker. I walk. I mean, I've had people. Of course, my wife complains all the time that we're going through airports or something. I have to stop and wait for her. And then we start walking again. I stop waiting for her. And one of my staff members said to me, they were with me one time, I guess at the Capitol or somewhere, and there was another person who was accompanying us, and they were having a conversation. They were behind me. They were having a conversation. They said, "Man, he walks fast." So my staff member said, "I can't keep up with him." Now I don't do that intentionally. It's just the way I am. I'm a long-legged person. I'm all legs, short torso, and I stride. I move. If I come out of the airport, if I'm sitting close to the exit, when I come out of that airport, I come out of the airplane. I mean, when I'm deplaning, I guarantee you that unless I'm sitting toward the back, which most of the time I don't buy first class, but I get upgraded because I fly a lot. I get upgraded a lot because I don't waste people's money, buying first class tickets unless the price is the differential so small that I say, hey, I'll take the comfort because sometimes it's worth it, but most of the time it's not because the prices are just ridiculous. But either if I'm sitting toward the front, so I'll buy comfort with Delta. I fly Delta. And so I might be sitting in the first, second, third row from the, not first, sixth, seventh, if I'm not in first class, sixth, seventh, eighth row from the exit. So, but if I'm not in the back of the plane, and occasionally I am because changes of flights and you miss one flight and you end up back in the galley, But if I'm toward the front of that plane, when I come off that plane, I guarantee you, I'm the first person in my car because I am moving. It's just, but I tell you what, those forced marches in motivation, whew, I mean, I thought I could walk. These drill instructors could walk. Now I would give them a run for their money, but these drill instructors could walk. I mean, man, and you're walk running. And now you got your rifle, you got your backpack, you've got your helmet, you've got all your gear that you're carrying, and you're walking 5 miles, 6 miles, 7 miles at an absolutely just debilitating pace. And by the way, it's really the runs and the forced marches will force a lot of people out. The people who got DAB, the people who couldn't make it, they just couldn't handle it. They fall further and further and further and further and further behind. You do that, a few times, and after a while, they start to realize you're just not. I hear again, I don't know what they call them now, but when I was in the Marine Corps, we called them non-hackers. You're just a non-hacker. You can't hack it. It's just you can't do it, and so they send you home, give you a general discharge, and try to forget you ever joined the Marine Corps. But that was motivation. And finally, my motivational drill instructor came to me and said, you got your mind right now, Private? And I said, yes, sir. I am a born again, high and tight Marine, sir. Folks, let me tell you, I'm laughing about it now, but let me tell you, I was so glad to get out of motivation. Man, whatever my drill instructor, I tell you what, I didn't laugh after that. When I got back to my platoon and my drill instructor spoke, I took every word seriously, and I was not playing around because I said, man, they're not going to stick me in that hole again. and have me in that kind of holding pattern like that, I mean, just going through sheer misery and knowing you're getting nowhere. Because you don't get out of motivation until that drill instructor looks at you and says, okay, I think you're ready. And you've convinced him that you are. So I went back. Well, now, believe it or not, folks, I went back and I became a rising star. I carried the guard arm again. If you're not, those of you who've been in the Marine Corps, you'll know what I'm talking about. The guard arm carrier is the person who sets the pace for the runs and the walks, because you've got to be up front. That means you can't be slow, and you can't be weak, and you can't be the person who falls out. You're the guard arm carrier. That means often you are calling the cadence for your entire platoon. So I became a little bit of a star at that point. That got interrupted too, but I won't get into that story, but that got interrupted too. But during that time, I apparently scored very high on the standardized tests that the Marine Corps gave. And my drill instructor came to me one time. You know, for some reason, I associate this with having gone to church. We had to go to church, by the way. Did you know that? Yeah. Well, you had to go to chaplain. Maybe we were violating people's First Amendment rights. I don't know. But you had to go. Now, I was, of course, dedicated as a Christian and had been raised in the church while I was in foster care. I didn't care anything about going to church, but I went. I don't remember anything that was said because I don't think that much was said. But nevertheless, for some reason, I associated with the coming out of chapel that my drill instructor called me aside, took me in a little side room and said to me, listen, and mentioned the test. He said, you know, you scored very high on the Marine Corps standardized tests. Well, I didn't know that. Nobody had told me that. And said, you know, the Marine Corps is looking for people like you to become officers. And I thought, okay. And I asked, well, what would that mean? He said, well, it would mean you would leave here. If you agreed to do this, he said you would leave here pretty quickly, be in the next day or two, and we would send you to Quantico, and you would start all over again with basic training there, but basic training for an officer. He said, so there would be that. You'd be starting your basic training all over again, but you'd be training to be an officer. When you finish, you'd be a second lieutenant. He said, but the other thing is, in order to do this, for you to become a Marine Corps officer, the Marine Corps wants more time from you. So you'd have to extend from 4 years, because I'd signed up for 4 years. You have to extend from 4 years to 6 years. You have to give an additional 2 years. Now, I don't know how high I scored on those tests. Well, actually, I do know how high I scored on those tests, pretty high. But what I do know is this. Well, I was still a dumb kid. I was still a dumb kid because I said 2 years. And folks, I tell you, I look back on that now and think 2 years is absolutely nothing. But at that time, 2 years seemed like an eternity. I'm thinking, I'd have to do another 2 years. It's like you think another 2 years on death row or something. I turned it down. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to give it another 2 years. Now, I tell you, when I look back on that there are several decisions that I made in my life. Several, yeah, I'd say several. I'm thinking 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. At any rate, it's not that many, but this is one of them. I think, man, how stupid could I be? I had an opportunity to be a Marine Corps officer, and I turned it down. Because he told me, he said, if you can do Marine Corps, if you can do enlisted boot camp, you can do officers boot camp. He said, they're really not different. He said, the difference is we'll be training you to be a leader, not training you to be a grunt. But I said, no, 2 more years. And that was my main thing. 2 more years. Oh no, I can't do 6 years. And that's one of the great regrets of my life. I've often thought, man, I wish I'd been smarter. I wish I'd had more wisdom, because I had the opportunity to be a Marine Corps officer. How many people get that chance? And I turned it down. You know, it's one of the things where you're going to smack yourself. You know? But here's the solace I take. If that had really been part of God's plan for my life, dumb kid or no dumb kid, I would have somehow ended up doing it. But apparently it wasn't. Because, you know, the other thing I think is I've often kicked myself for having turned down that opportunity. But then I'm thinking, but you know what? Vietnam, even though they were winding the war down, guess who was being sent to Vietnam almost more than any other single set of Marines? Second lieutenants. Because they needed leaders in Vietnam, and they would send these green second lieutenants into combat to lead these troops. And they didn't have a clue in most cases what they were doing. I mean, a lot of the troops who had been there, been in country for a while, look at these second lieutenants and just go, oh, brother. And a lot of these guys ended up getting killed. So I say, well, who knows? That might have been my lot. Yeah, it might have been that if I had accepted it, I would have been trained, would have graduated second lieutenant. I'd have had bars, true, but then I would have had to go to Vietnam. Maybe. More likely than what ultimately happened. And who knows whether I would have survived it. So at any rate, I say, well, it must not have been God's plan for my life. If it had been, I probably would have ended up in a Marine Corps officer. I mean, if it had been, I would have ended up a Marine Corps officer somehow. But apparently it wasn't. But that's just my speculation. I still regret not having made the decision to become a Marine Corps officer. So I graduate from boot camp, and they decide, again, based on my test scores, that I can be an air radar technician. Now, folks, I am not a technical person. I don't have the patience. I really don't. To do technical stuff, and it's just not my thing. But as I've said, the Marine Corps doesn't care what you want to do. They only care what you have the ability to do. And if you have the ability to do a job that few others have the ability to do, you're going to get that job. So, I mean, this required reading schematics and, you know, being able to handle conceptual material. You know, you had to be able to analyze schematics. You had to learn the laws of electronics, and there's a lot of stuff that you needed to know. So they sent me after advanced infantry training, sent me out to San Diego for electronics training school, and then from San Diego they sent me to 29 Palms for training on the AN/TPQ-10 radar, which, believe it or not, was a combat radar. It was not a it was not a peacetime radar. It was a combat radar that was intended to communicate with airplanes flying too high for ground-to-air artillery, where the technician would give the pilot the coordinates so that the pilot knew when to drop the bomb. In other words, we had to calculate the trajectory of that bomb, the altitude of that airplane, the speed of that airplane, and when that bomb needed to be dropped in order to hit its target, where the pilot could not see the target. In other words, we were looking at the target. In fact, we were calculating the target with the radar and telling the pilot when to drop the bombs. But the pilot would be safe from any ground-to-air, shoulder-fired missiles or that kind of thing. So the pilot would be in a safer position dropping bombs. Well, boy, that thing was a monstrosity. Oh, my goodness gracious. When I finally got trained, because it had 3 great big modules on it. It's like a tripod, but the modules were heavy. And it was a combat radar. You know what that meant? That meant it was mobile. It had to be mobile. You had to be able to move in the bush with this radar. Well, this was a really bad. I understand it, by the way, that it was used, it was deployed, but not for very long. And of course, with technology today. we don't even need that. It was, this thing would have been, you, if I could show you a picture of it today, you would have thought it was prehistoric. I mean, big old gigantic thing with a big old dish on it, three big modules. Well, part of our training was to assemble and dismantle and move this radar as training for when we might employ it in the bush. And that was part of what we did. Of course, we also had to fix it and, figure out what was wrong with it and all that kind of stuff and get it working again when it wasn't working properly. So basically, you'd have to yank these modules out of their position, yank them, and put them on a truck bed or put them on a something that, we're going to transport them to the next, or put them on a Jeep, whatever. We're going to transport them to the next spot. Well, folks, one day in training, I yanked that thing and something hit my back. I mean, it's really like somebody hit my back with a sledgehammer. I am serious. Like somebody hit my back with a sledgehammer. And boom, out I went. I mean, I wasn't unconscious, but I couldn't stand up. And they had to take me to the hospital. So I get to the hospital, and boy, you have to remember now, this is almost 50 years ago, okay? No, wait a minute, forgive me. No, what am I saying? This is over 50 years ago. This is over 50 years ago. Because this would have happened, this was 50 years ago, this was 53 years ago. Yeah, this was 53 years ago. So over 50 years ago. So, don't, if somebody were to investigate, they might find out, well, he had the chronology wrong, or he had, so please show me a little grace in that, because it was a long time ago. But at any rate, so I woke up in the hospital. When I say I woke up in the hospital, I just remember being in the hospital, these doctors being around me. I don't know. I think they must have given me some shot or something that kind of did knock me out, because man, they came to me and they said, "You have a cracked vertebrae." I'm thinking, what? I don't know how, but I won't get into my own physiology because I don't want to bore you with that. But at any rate, obviously there's some susceptibility in the curvature of my back to this kind of injury. Well, who would know that? But at any rate, they said, yeah, you cracked your L5 vertebrae. And I said, really? They said, yep, it's cracked. And I'm thinking, well, wow, what does this mean? And they said, what it means is that you can't do the duty you've been doing, because it will worsen that injury and really maybe cause you some very, very serious problems. You can't do what you just did to cause that. Well, I'm an air radar technician working on this radar. I said, well, then what am I supposed to do? They said, well, to tell you the truth, the only way you can go back on duty is we can operate on your back, but we want to tell you that there is a risk that in operating on your spine, that something could go wrong and you could end up paralyzed from the waist down. There is that risk. I mean, we have to remember, again, this is 50 years ago. We didn't have laser technology. We didn't have the stuff that we can do now. But I would imagine even now, when you're operating on the back and the spinal cord is involved, even now, it's very, very risky and very, very dangerous. But imagine what it was like 50 years ago. And the doctors really gave me a solemn warning. They said, now, you can feel free to take that risk, and we'll do it. But we just want you to understand. And what they were going to do is they're going to fuse my spine. They were going to fuse the spot that was cracked. And they told me, there would be obviously some aftermath of that. There would be some side effects, some back stiffness, this kind of thing. But but you wouldn't have a cracked vertebrae. And by the way, the crack's not like it was an inch long. It was apparently a hairline thin crack, but it was cracked. And I said, well, so if I don't have the operation, they said, we have been instructed to tell you that if you don't have the operation, you cannot return to duty. And if you do not return to duty, so you will be discharged, honorably discharged as a disabled veteran. And they explained to me, the Vietnam War is winding down. We're sending people home, and we're going through a reduction in forces right now. And so that's what we've been instructed to tell you. And I said, well, I'm not going to risk being paralyzed from the waist down. Because, oh my goodness gracious, folks, again, if I turned down becoming a Marine Corps officer, you can imagine what I thought of the possibility of putting my life in the hands of these doctors with them warning me that I could get paralyzed from the waist down if something went wrong in this very sensitive operation of fusing my spine. So I said, well, no, I'll take the honorable discharge. And I said, what would that mean? When would that happen? They said, well, you have to, we'll send you back to duty. And when you get back to duty, you'll talk to your base commander, and they'll walk you through all that. Now, I'm guessing that was probably about 6 months or so before I got out. But here again, I'm only guessing. But the timetable is very, very fuzzy. So I basically was put on light duty at that point because I was in Naval Air Station South Weymouth. There was no duty for Marines at South Weymouth. There was a small contingency of us, and that's what we were, pretty much. We were radar techs. I mean, I got to fly with these pilots in the helicopters and all that stuff, and really got to know some naval pilots and be in some airplanes and helicopters with them. But it wasn't really part of my duty. It was just kind of something to do, And so February, I believe it was the 21st, if I'm not mistaken, February 21st. I'd have to check my DD-214 to be sure about that, because I sometimes get confused with the 21st or 23rd. But of 1973, I was honorably discharged from the United States Marine Corps as a disabled veteran. Oh, and by the way, they also told me, they said this. They said, now look, they said, you will be fine for most normal activities if nothing happens to exacerbate this injury, and you're not doing, because again, how heavy were these modules? I would only be guessing. I was a young, strong Marine. I mean, I was no puff, powder puff. I can't remember how heavy. I don't remember how heavy these things were, but I tell you one thing, they weren't 20 pounds. I guarantee you those things were probably 30, 40, maybe even 50 pounds, those modules. I mean, again, whoever designed this thing, boy, I don't know what they were thinking. And this is supposed to be a mobile thing, where you're moving through the jungles with this thing. So, in a combat situation, you got to be able to be nimble. And they needed to build something a whole lot lighter. But they said, but we can tell you this, and I'll never forget it. They said, it's going to get worse as you get older. You're going to feel it. As you get older, it will get worse. And I'm thinking, well, I'm in my early 20s now. I mean, well, I'm not, why would I worry about that? What's the point? Well, here I am now. I'm in relatively good shape. I work out pretty much every day, but I have to tell you, I do suffer from back stiffness. And in fact, my wife and I have had to make a very substantial investment in just the right bed, because folks, there were times I would joke with my wife. I said, I'd wake up and my back would be so stiff. I said, now I really do feel like an old man. But through a variety of things, chiropractor, massage therapy, and staying in good shape myself, I've been able to minimize the symptoms of that been believing God for healing, but I've never had been gone in to examine to see, just, what it is or where it is or what it's like and all that. I talk about fusion, over the years, as you get older, your spine collapses anyway. I mean, it's the reason why old people lose height is that gravity continues to work on the spine and the vertebrae get closer and closer and closer and closer together. A 32nd of an inch here, 32nd of an inch there, 32nd of an inch there. Pretty soon you got a whole inch of height that you lost. So, at any rate, folks, so that was my career in the Marine Corps. I never saw combat, even though I was a Vietnam era veteran, but I never saw combat. And the radar I was trained on that was supposed to be a combat radar, again, I think I did some research on this a few years ago, and I'm pretty sure that it did get used, but not very long. They didn't find it to be very effective. Well, who knows how much money we spent, the United States government, the Defense Department spent on that thing, and it really, really didn't do much. Naval Air Station South Weymouth, by the way, which is where I was, my 3 duty stations were Paris Island, MCAD in San Diego, 24 duty stations, 29 Palms, California, and then Naval Air Station South Weymouth. Now, Naval Air Station South Weymouth has been closed in Massachusetts. That's how I ended up in Massachusetts. Ended up going to college at the University of Massachusetts at Boston and going to Harvard Law School, because I met people from Harvard Law School, which part of our duty was to train reservists coming in on what we did. So that was part. So I had weekend duty sometime. Whenever reservists were coming, I had weekend duty and had to be on base on Saturdays and Sundays to train reservists. But Naval Air Station South Weymouth only has a symbol now. Pretty, because my wife and I went back there a few years ago to see what it was like when we were visiting in that area. I don't know whether we were on vacation or what, but we went back to see it, and basically it's kind of a park area with an airplane display and a plaque about Naval Air Station South Weymouth, but the whole base has been closed down. They've turned it into apartment housing and all of that. But that's where I got out, and then when I got out, we were living in Quincy, Massachusetts. We moved from Quincy, Massachusetts to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Once I knew I got into Harvard Law School, which was in Cambridge, we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I finished up college at the University of Massachusetts and then went on to Harvard Law School and got saved in Harvard Law School. And the rest, as they say, is history. But that's not the sum total of my military experience, because obviously I went through a lot of things at each of those duty stations and dealt with a lot of issues, had my share of conflicts at those places, and saw my share of sadly, of racial division in those places, which even then, unsaved, I wasn't a part of. I wouldn't be a part of it. Although I was imbued with a lot of that 60s mentality, but I just, even then, I guess this is what my father instilled in me. I just treated each human being as a person, and just, that was it. I mean, I heard a lot of racial stuff, but I just never bought into it. People were people. One of my best friends at 29 Palms was a guy named Wayne Pogue. Now, I haven't seen Wayne Pogue since I left 29 Palms. If I'm not mistaken, Wayne was from Texas, and he and I were very good friends. And forgive me for even putting it this way, but to be accurate, I'd just have to. I was the only black friend Wayne had. There were no other people who wanted to hang around, because it was the division was that great. When I got to 29 Palms, one of the first things as a black Marine you had to learn was how to dap. And dapping, if you all have never heard of this, was basically when you went into the mess hall and you sat down at a table, you had to give dap to every black Marine that was there. And dapping was this thing where you hit your fist 15 times, and once you learned it, it was easy. But I mean, my good, it was complicated. It was very complicated, and only black people did it. And if you didn't do it, you were an outcast. It was, and I used to look at that sometimes and think, man, we're all Marines. We should all be together. But frankly, during that time, well, again, remember, we just come out of the 60s. All the black Marines sat together. And nobody else was invited. Our drill instructor used to say this: there's only one color in my Marine Corps, green, which for your combat uniform, basically, and your I don't say casual uniform, but the dress uniform. We know about dress blues, but the Marine Corps dress uniform was tan. I would say tan or dark beige, but your casual or duty uniform was green. And that's what my drill instructor used. There's only one color in my Marine Corps, green. But that wasn't the reality when I finally got, particularly 29 Palms. It wasn't so much an issue at MCAD, in part because, frankly, the number of radar technicians was a very small, fairly exclusive group of people. And when I was going through class, there was a small class of people. I think there were like 9 or 10 of us, and I was the only black Marine in my class, at least. Now, they met others coming after me or came before me, but I was the only black Marine in my class. So at any rate, but that was a different era. Like I said, that was 50 years ago. And, I've dedicated my life since I've been saved, pretty much since I've been saved, since shortly after I got saved, to transcending all of that, to seeing all of us as human beings and as human beings and citizens of our country, sharing this common vision of individual liberty and prosperity and hope and the fulfillment of God-given potential that this nation offers, sharing that in common. Of course, unfortunately, there are people, sadly, who still want to, for all practical purposes, they really want to maintain segregation. And it's not Americans of European ancestry, it's Americans of African ancestry who are doing it. They want, it's us versus them. Jesus said a house divided against itself. I got to go, don't I? Jesus said a house divided against itself is brought to desolation. Brought to desolation. Well, look. Thank you, veterans. Thank you, active duty people. Thank you, police officers, and all of you out there who put your lives on the line for the rest of us. Thank you so much for your service. We're all grateful to you. And we love you. We're praying for you. You are the very best of us as American citizens. And I will never cease to express my gratitude to you. So thank you. God bless each and every one of you. I hope you have a wonderful Veterans Day. You know what? If you see a veteran or you see a person on active duty and you have a chance, thank them for their service. If they're in a restaurant, buy their lunch. You can do it anonymously. Buy their dinner. Do something for them to let them know that there are people out here, there are Americans who really appreciate them, care about them, and support them. I don't know that we will ever run into any ICE agents, but they are particularly in need of encouragement right now, given the level of opprobrium and venom and wickedness being hurled at them by the Democrat Party and the left. So by all means, if you run into any of them, let them know that the majority of Americans out here support them. All right, God bless each and every one of you. This has been a little bit different program. I haven't gotten into the shutdown, which I thought I would do, what else was I going to talk about today? I said if I got to it. I was also going to talk about, actually, I guess that was it. The shutdown was what I was really going to cover, other than this. But look, in the meantime, you all know what to do. Stand up, step up, speak up, and refuse to back up. You know, that's what veterans have done for us, isn't it? That's what our active duty people are doing for us right now. Stand up, step up, speak up, and they have been prepared to gear up and load up. Yeah, they're prepared to gear up and load up and refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side. God bless you, veterans. God bless the United States of America, and God bless each and every one of you and your families.